Okay, we're ready to go. So welcome everybody to the Environment, Flooding, Climate Change and Waste Overview Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting will be broadcast live to the public via YouTube. For those of you not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Can I please remind anyone to only turn on their microphones when you wish or are invited to speak and turn them off afterwards. We've received apologies from Mr. Bohm this afternoon. So I'll proceed with item 1. This is the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of June 2026. I move that the minutes are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everybody in agreement? Happy with that? Jolly good. Item 2, we've received no questions from the public. Item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 32 (1). We've received one question from Mrs. Bottomley. A written answer has been provided to Mrs. Bottomley and the question and answer has been circulated to all members of the committee and published on the Council's website. Mrs. Bottomley, would you like to ask any supplementary questions? Please bear in mind, supplementary questions are limited to one per question and must be for clarification, not to introduce new material.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the response. While I appreciate other agencies have a responsibility for the waterways, including that through Bradgate Park, what are we as LCC doing to hold these external agencies to account and ensure that we do all we can to protect our residents from future incidents? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that? Anne.
If it's okay, we just are in the process of providing a response to that supplementary question so we can get that circulated to the committee, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Happy with that? Jolly good. I'll proceed then on to item 4. Urgent items. There are no urgent items. Item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do any members have any interests they wish to declare? Okay, thank you. Item 6, declarations of the party whip in accordance with Overview Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? Thank you very much. 7, presentations of petitions under Standing Order 33. I haven't received any petitions. Which brings us to the first substantive item on the agenda, item 8, water quality in Leicestershire. As per the request of the committee at its meeting in March 2026, we've invited external partners to the meeting to discuss water quality concerns in the county. First, I'd like to welcome our visitors. We have representatives from the Environment Agency, Severn Trent Water and from Anglian Water who have joined us online. Thank you all for attending today. Can I ask that you introduce yourselves when you start your presentations? We're also joined by our Director Anne Crothers and lead member Mr. Tilbury. In preparation for this item, members will be aware we raised a number of questions with each agency in advance of the meeting. Responses to these have kindly been provided and these have been circulated to all members of the committee and published on the council website. Each partner has been asked to provide a short presentation and I will therefore invite the Environment Agency first to provide theirs, followed by Severn Water and then Anglian Water. Unless anyone has any pressing questions during each presentation, I'd like to suggest that we open up for questions after having heard from all 3 partners. Members are also reminded that although you can use local examples to discuss wider strategic issues, all local patch issues can be picked up outside of the meeting and then can be directed to the relevant organisation through the officers. So first of all, I'd like to invite Brian Hemmings and David Turnbull from the Environment Agency. If you could please introduce yourselves and provide your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm David Turnbull, Area Flood Risk Manager for the Environment Agency in the East Midlands. My colleague, Brian Hemmings.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Brian Hemmings. I have a wider remit, but included in that remit in the Environment Agency for the East Midlands are water resources and water quality matters.
So we'll divide our presentation into two. I'm going to cover flood risk first, and then Brian's going to take over and do water quality and resources. So a very little bit of context, especially in terms of flood risk, but more generally, the Environment Agency function in four main ways. They are, as you can see on the screen, the first slide there. Thanks, Grill. Strategic, operational, regulatory and advisory. And what does that mean? So strategically, the Environment Agency operates across the whole of England, and we are charged with setting the national strategy for flood risk. And that strategy falls directly from the Floods and Water Management Act of 2010. In doing that, we'll set the strategy and we'll provide national flood risk data and an assessment of risk. Operationally, the Environment Agency is divided into 14 operational areas, and Leicestershire is actually served by 3 in part, but majority of Leicestershire is served by the East Midlands operational area, which is where myself and Brian sit. And in terms of flood risk, those operations will be things like building and maintaining our flood defences, operating and issuing flood forecasting and warning. It will be maintaining our assets and water courses, and lots of other things which we do, but I'll move on in the interest of time. On the regulatory front, we regulate activities within main rivers, and that's if anybody wants to do an activity in, on, above, under, or within 8 metres of a main river, they require a permit. And I'm very conscious that sometimes the permits are seen as a bit of a must-do or a blocker or a pain to some people that have to do them. But I would just put out there that without these permits, our waterways and flood risk would be in a far worse state than they are today, because we make sure that the environment and flood risk activities are fit for purpose when they're done on the main rivers. And then finally, advisory, we offer a lot of advice to the likes of the lead local flood authorities, but particularly through the planning process. So we are a statutory consultee for a certain amount of planning applications, and they are the ones that will fall within certain flood categories of flood zones. So it's not all planning applications, but a certain section of them. And we are not the decision makers in the planning process, we advise. We also advise central government on the risk, the current state of the risk and future risk. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I've mentioned the National Flood Risk Management Strategy. We set the current strategy in 2020, and it is due for an update this year, actually, which we are busily crunching away in the background with in 2026. And that sets the strategic direction for all flood risk management activities. Now, the lead local flood authorities themselves will have their own local strategies, and they should be done in a manner which is consistent with the national strategy. And Leicestershire have got a good local flood risk management strategy, and it is very consistent with the national strategy. Next slide, please. This is just a quick reference to the updates. We've learned a lot even since 2020. There'll be more of a focus on surface water flooding as opposed to main river and ordinary watercourse flooding in the new strategy. As I say, we have learned a lot and we've made a lot of progress since 2020. But the new strategy in itself will be pretty much as it was, but with updates, because the direction and the policy underlining that strategy hasn't changed since the Floods and Water Management Act in 2010. Next slide, please. So the strategy sets 3 overarching ambitions, and you can see them on the presentation there, and I will go into a little bit about what each of these are. But the overall strapline right at the top there is that we have an ambition for a nation ready for and resilient to flooding and coastal change today, tomorrow, and to the year 2100. So what does that mean? I'll give you just a few examples. So climate resilient places. The science tells us that flooding is going to get more severe, flooding is going to get more extreme, and flooding is going to get more frequent. The science tells us that peak rainfall intensity in Leicestershire could increase by 40% by 2100, and the river flows could increase by 60%. Now, that's a sobering thought for all of us in Leicestershire that have been involved or impacted by flood risk and flood risk management. So I'll just let that resonate a little bit. This is what the science is telling us. And as part of the strategy, we strive that places are more resilient to that incoming risk. So the present risk today, but also the future risk, which is undoubtedly increasing. Next slide, please. So we, in all of our modelling and when we build our defences, we include those change projections into everything that we do. And we encourage other authorities to be doing the same. And we work closely with our partners, not just lead local flood authorities, but all risk management authorities, and indeed the general public and businesses, and encourage them to understand the risk that is there today and the risk that is impending on us all in the future. Next slide, please. Part of what we do for that is the classic one is our flood investment program, so build defences. The Environment Agency protect more properties than we've ever done in the past. We have more assets and defences than we've ever had in the past. But we are facing an enormous increasing challenge. And the Environment Agency will not be able to build the nation out of flood risk and the future flood risk. It's got to be a much more adaptive, collaborative partnership approach if we are to cope with what is coming in the near and medium term future. But we do, as I say, have a programme of investment. It's not just the Environment Agencies, other risk management authorities build that as well. And two examples there on the slide. Very recently, we've delivered property flood resilience in Braunston, Red Mile and Sileby. And we've got a capital scheme on Woodbrook contributaries in Loughborough, of which one of the questions I noticed was particularly on Woodbrook. So I'm happy to do an update on that further if required. The second aspiration, today's growth and infrastructure resilient to tomorrow's climate, that is all about making the right decisions today for the future. So in our planning policy, in our planning decisions, are we preparing ourselves and making the right decisions for the future? And we will advise authorities on what the incoming risk is. Maybe the odd occasion that we'll object to a planning application on grounds of flood risk. Typically, we prefer to work with authorities and advise what applications should be looking for and incorporating in their build. But that goes wider than just locally. You're talking nationally as well. If we're building new roads or new railway systems, it's imperative that they understand what the flood risk and the risk to the environment is from what they are doing and what those infrastructure projects, how they should be resilient to that increasing risk. I'm going on a bit longer than I thought I was. I'll try and speed up. Next slide, please. And
don't worry, take your time.
Okay, thank you. And the third of those major ambitions is a nation ready to respond and adapt to flooding and coastal change. So we know that there's currently around 6 million properties that have been built on the floodplain. 6 million properties that are at flood risk. That's going to increase with our projections, scientific projections, to around 8 million by the end of the century. It's an enormous amount. And yet, even it's hard to believe when you're in a role such as myself and the amount my job and everything I do professionally is centered around flood risk, but yet only 1 in 4 people still appreciate and understand the risk that they're under when it comes to flood risk. So there's still an enormous challenge there just to get the message out and to warn people and to make sure they understand their risk, because that is the first step to being resilient to flood risk, is to understand the risk in the first place. Next slide, please. As part of what the Environment Agency do to help with that, we issue alerts and warnings, and they are on 3 levels. These may well be familiar to you. The first level is a flood alert, which is indicating that flooding is possible and encourages people to be prepared. Sorry, we're on the next slide, Aquila, I should have said that. Right. The next level is a flood warning, and a flood warning is issued when it's expected that property is going to flood, and we encourage immediate action. And then the third level, with the strapline of survive, is when a severe flood warning is issued, and that risks and indicates a risk to life. So when the Environment Agency and indeed our professional partners work through some criteria, and if those criteria are triggered, we will issue a severe flood warning. You may have all received the emergency alert recently for the wildfires, and previous to that in Leicestershire, if anybody was local to Proctor's Park and Barrow Pond saw, we issued an emergency alert during Storm Henk, which is one of the first emergency alerts to be issued globally, nationally, sorry. That's separate from the Environment Agency. That's a government issued alert, but we feed into that if it is regards to flood risk. Okay, next slide, Quill. I'm just going to give you some little bits of facts and figures about the risk in Leicestershire. So we've got 60 main rivers. The main rivers are the ones that the Environment Agency will manage the risk from operationally. You've got hundreds and hundreds of smaller watercourses that feed into the main rivers. The main river in Leicestershire is the River Soar, which is the blue spine running south to north generally through the graphic I can see there. And in the East Midlands, it's one of our big 3. The equivalent, very equivalent, is the River Derwent in Derbyshire. And both the Soar and the Derwent feed into the River Trent, which is a much bigger system and absorbs the Soar and the Derwent. The Soar catchment being around 1,000 kilometres squared, the River Trent being around 10,000 kilometres squared in terms of catchment. Next slide, please. Some facts and figures there. I think probably the most sobering one, which I would encourage you to take note of, is the fluvial flood risk. So that's just from rivers and watercourses. In Leicestershire, if you include the city, you have around 27,000 properties that are on the floodplain. If you whiz down to the bottom of that slide, and you can see that even though that is a huge amount of properties, it's actually dwarfed by the number of properties that are at surface water risk. So that's before the water even gets into the rivers and watercourses. That's from overland flow and what we call pluvial flooding. So an enormous amount of properties in Leicester and Leicestershire that are on the floodplain. Next slide, please. We've had 3 very, very harsh, impactful storms in the East Midlands area in the last, well, we're coming up to the last 3 years now, because we're nearly October 26, aren't we? Babette, Henk in January 2025. So when we name storms, they're done alphabetically. So if you think Storm Babette was October 2023, Storm Henk was January of 2024, we went through C, D, E, F, and G as well in terms of storms. So this period operationally was an enormous challenge for all of the risk management authorities. You can see some of the stats there. Nearly 3,000 properties flooded during Storm Babette, 1,600 in Storm Henk, and 1,300 in January 2025. What was really impactful and very harsh on many Leicestershire communities was the Storm Henk in the January 25. You can see the yellow and the green dots more or less in the same position. So lots of communities experienced flooding in January of 2024, and unfortunately were hit again in January of 2025. And we are very conscious of the impact that that's had on many of the communities. I'm nearly there. Just some more graphics of some of the impacts. What I would point you towards, particularly in this slide, in Storm Babette, 3% of all the East Midlands properties that flooded were in Leicestershire. Not a massive amount. But Leicestershire didn't get away lightly because Storm Henk hit. Next slide, Quill, thank you. And 58% of all the East Midlands properties flooded were in Leicestershire. And then it got even worse in terms of Leicestershire impact. 93% of January 2025 properties that were flooded were in Leicestershire. And that's the event where we issued the severe flood warning and an emergency alert for Proctor's Park. So that's the end of my bit of the presentation. If there's one message I can give, it's that the science predicts that flooding is getting more severe, more extreme, and collectively, as a nation, we need to adapt and be resilient to that, because there's no one authority, whether it's Leicestershire or the Environment Agency or Severn Trent, that can build us out of that risk. It's got to be done adaptively and collaboratively. On that, I'll hand over to my colleague.
Thank you, Brian. Can I just ask you, did you mention Braunston in there?
Yes, some property flood resilience measures.
Did you guys sort out the Amy Street?
Collaboratively, yes.
Yeah, I'll thank you personally for that, because that's in my constituency and I requested that work, so thank you. Okay, so Jason's next.
Brian.
Sorry, Brian's next. Oh, I got you. Sorry, it's David and yeah.
So the way I've done this is I've taken the question you've asked and I've provided the detailed answers on the sheet, but I'll just quickly run over them in these slides, ready for any future questions later. So next slide, please. You asked what our role and responsibilities are with regard to water quality. We do monitor the health of the rivers, lakes and water bodies. We've got an extensive monitoring programme.
Sorry, can I just stop you a minute? Is there any way we can get the lights dimmed? Because there are people at the end of the room can't see what's on the slide. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Shall I carry on or shall I just wait?
He's just dimming them, I think. Oh, that's a lot better.
Okay.
Is that okay with everybody? Thanks, Akil. Yeah. Carry on.
Thank you. So we have an extensive monitoring capability right across the rivers, lakes and water bodies. We identify actions to improve environmental conditions, and we regulate activities that that could impact water quality. And I'll come into a bit more detail on each of these as we go through. We regulate the discharges, including working with Severn Trent and watching water companies across the nation. We work closely with partners to reduce catchment pollution. Importantly, we manage water abstraction licenses to make sure that there's a balance between what people need, what industry needs, and what the environment requires. And at the moment, quite drastically, we support drought response and water resilience in times such as now when we're in drought. And our aim really is to deliver clean and plentiful water and align to the EA 2030 plan, which is the government plans. Next slide, please. So the question here, I think, was a bit more about the context around Leicestershire and what the state of water quality is throughout Leicestershire. So in the monitoring and the assessment, we monitor right across a whole spectrum of things. So water ecology and habitat sampling. We have classification measures. We use local data, modelling and catchment evidence. And then that's all put into a catchment data explorer. And we then classify each, and we mark each of the water bodies, the water rivers, etc., according to the various different classifications. And even though you might have a river that is very good on just about everything, if it has one thing that's rated poor, then the whole river is classed as poor. So there's a one out, all out classification process there. The sort of major reasons for poor status in this county: fish barriers and weirs, the legacy of the Industrial Revolution in particular, lots of weirs put in throughout all our river systems, and that prevents fish migrating up and down and has had a dramatic impact on fish stocks. You've got physical modifications, obviously going through towns and villages and things like that. You'll see lots of physical modifications. Some of those will never change, but where we've had those done in the countryside and things, our aspirations are to remove as many of those as we possibly can without being detrimental to farming and other interests. We have invasive species, I'm afraid to say, increasingly a problem and quite challenging to deal with. We have nutrient, livestock and soil pressures. So for the first time, I think 2 years ago, the impact of farming was seen to be a bigger challenge to water quality than the impact of our sewage treatment processes and things like that. So that's actually the work that's been done within water companies to reduce that impact has significantly improved, and it's now farming that actually is where we're focusing our major efforts. But you still got sewage discharges and storm overflows as a challenge, and trade and industry and urban runoff is another challenge. Next slide, please. So as I said, we have a one out, all out principle. We monitor and assess using all sorts of different criteria, and we then target our investment and our enforcement using that evidence. So there's all sorts of things that information, that monitoring information plays into. And sadly, since 2019, when I say sadly, it's a true fact, they looked at the chemical status, and every single water body now fails on chemical status because some of the chemicals that are in our water systems are a hangover from the days when we didn't really concentrate and think about those things, and they exist and last a very long time. It takes an awful long time for them to be flushed out or to be absorbed back into the environment in a safe way. So at the moment, all water bodies fail on the chemical status. Next slide, please. It's not all bad news. So over the period and all the efforts that go into improving our water quality, sadly, these things don't change overnight, and it does take time. But here, since 2000, you can see that the phosphate content within the River Soar in Leicestershire, which David just pointed out, that has significantly decreased, and that's a culmination of the efforts that the Environment Agency is involved in, that the water companies are involved in, and indeed all sorts of other efforts that we put in. And you can see that's a real positive downward trend. And that is typical of most water bodies in Leicestershire and indeed across the country. So slightly ironic that the public, I think quite rightly, have taken up water quality as a massive issue recently, sewage overflows and things like that. And I think that for us, that's really positive because it brings attention to it and helps us gather momentum and get actions in place to deal with those things. But there are some really good improvements ongoing in this system. Next slide, please. So this is just another way of looking at and understanding what the situation is within the Leicestershire rivers. So we've got 780 elements and 68%, it says good or high, but actually it's in good quality because I don't think we've got any in high according to the Water Framework Directive. But that actually tells you when you get below the one out, all out, that we have got a huge amount of good stuff and good quality in our rivers. Next slide, please. The next question was, what do we all do and how do we do it? And by the way, in the answers I've given you, there's some more graphics and things that talk a bit more detail about the quality of the rivers in Leicestershire. So the EA's role is we set the standards, we permit activities around water, and then we carry out enforcement actions to make sure those things are done. We investigate pollution incidents, and we also produce the river basin management plans. These are legal requirements, and they're done in collaboration with all sorts of other partners, including yourselves, water company, the wildlife trusts, etc. All sorts of people get consulted on these, and it sets the overall direction of where we want to go. And then we put our planning decisions in around the activities that are based in that plan. And there are a number of things that we do. There's the water investment plans that we do with the water companies, which we set targets for them to achieve improvements in, and they will look at their infrastructure and put money in to change their infrastructure to meet those targets that we set. And there are a whole load of other plans that we link into based on that river basin management plan. And we're currently going through the refreshment of that river basin management plan at the moment. We've assessed all the rivers and why they're failing, and then looking at how do we then put that right, and how do we make sure that that's baked into the plan, and how will that then follow through into these other plans. Next slide, please. So I think there was a question around the Environment Act and what changes that makes, the 2021 Environment Act. This has really forced real-time information and monitoring on water companies to see what storm overflows and what's actually happening in those. And the first part of that was for them to get the monitoring in place, and then for us to jointly understand and monitor that and deal with any particular issues. It also looks at continuous monitoring of dissolved oxygen, the pH of the water, the temperature, the turbidity, and the ammonium content. So really important stuff that we need to monitor. And then set and baked into the plan are some very clear targets to reduce by 80% phosphorus reduction by 2038. And that applies a 40% reduction for the agricultural nutrients and sediment pollution. And then statutory drainage and wastewater management plans need to be put in place with progressive storm overflow improvements through 2035, 2045 and up to 2050, when we hope to eradicate them all. There's the Office for Environment and Protection was set up, which is an independent oversight, so they can monitor the Environment Agency and the water companies and make sure these things are being put in place. And we as an EA get stronger abstraction license powers. So we can look at the existing abstraction licenses that exist and have existed for quite some time over the different rivers and water bodies, and look at how we can refine those and make them more efficient. Next slide, please. So what about Leicestershire in itself? Well, we've had an increase in staff, and we've increased our inspections and our enforcement activity. That's largely around water company interactions and with farming. So we have significant increase in people who go out and work with farmers, predominantly work with farmers rather than do enforcement action, to look at how they can help farmers work out how they can do better practices to prevent them from polluting the water. We do 10,000 plus water company inspections nationally. We've done the 220 Leicestershire farm inspections in 5 years. It doesn't sound very much, but those inspections are quite extensive, and they really do involve quite a lot of work. Involved in that is 70 plus prosecutions since 2015. Again, not a huge amount, but our inclination is not to go and prosecute farmers where we can help it. We don't want to put people out of their business. Most of them are really working very hard, and we would prefer to get them to take corrective action and put things in place that are, rather than prosecute them. But we have achieved over £158 million worth of fines. We've set 22.1 billion through the WINET programs, and you can see the rest there. There's a lot of activity that goes into improving our water quality. Next slide, please. You want to know, was there a serious water pollution prosecution? We've had one in the last 3 years, and that was the Fingers Farm sewage pumping station sewage spill. The case remains ongoing, so I'll leave it at that at the moment. I probably will note, and I know Severn Trent are here, Severn Trent are the only water company in the country that's still 4-star rated, which is the highest star rating you can get. We are the regulator who obviously deals with them, and the performance does, show that they work very hard on these activities. We don't always see eye to eye, it has to be said, but at the same time, I think we count ourselves pretty lucky, because when nationally we see the behaviour and the performance of some of the other water companies, actually, I think we're quite lucky. Next slide, please. Storm overflow data and monitoring. As I say, we monitor those now. The pollution incidents get recorded on a national incident recording system, which then comes through and gets into our business as usual people, if you like, to go and take action. The common causes are sewage failures, blockages, runoff, illegal activities. I've said Severn Trent's performance. It's 100% electronic monitoring, and we then double check that once we see data or somebody reports it to us, we will go and check it. Next slide, please. So next 5 years, this is interesting, I think. This is the WINEP, the Water Investment Programme. AMP7, that's the last one that's just completed. It delivered 64 upgrade actions and monitoring installations in this area. It's reduced phosphorus, ammonia, and all of those things. But AMP8 is looking at 130 plus improvements. It's significantly bigger. And that in itself brings some challenges, because you need a resource to service that and make sure it's happening correctly. And it's obviously a massive programme of work for the water company. But it's a really positive thing. And I think it is actually driven by the political impact of people getting interested in water quality. And you can see a direct correlation between people getting interested and really wanting to see improvements. And that has played into the investment process here. Next slide, please. I think you then gave some generic questions. We can cover those at the end if you want, or do you want us to go quickly through those?
We'll go through the final presentation and then we'll do all the questions, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're done. Those were generic questions on how, who would you call in the event of a flood and things like that. So
yeah, that was my question, actually.
was it?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Better
I saw the answers. Thank you for that. We'll go through it after the final presentation, and then we'll get everybody going. Believe me, I can hear in my mind a lot of questions firing off everywhere.
Excellent.
So thank you for that, Brian, and we'll carry on now with Jason, who's got a presentation for us as well.
Yeah, good afternoon all. Just checking you hear me. Yeah, Jason Rogers. I'm the head of water quality and environment for Severn Trent, and I've been in the industry since 1989, so many years in the water sector. And I suppose today's presentation is just to give you a bit of an update on the context and priorities for Severn Trent Water in this AMP, and specifically focus on water quality. So you can just pop onto the next page. So just a little bit about Severn Trent. So first of all, we serve about 8 million customers. We put into supply around 2 billion litres of water every day, and service then about 3.2 billion litres of waste. We operate from Scunthorpe to Gloucester, Shrewsbury, across to Leicester, so you can imagine the size of the region that we serve. As an organisation, we've doubled the number of people that work in the business in the last sort of 7 years. So we're up to around 11,000 employees within the organisation, and we've got 95,000 kilometres of sewer network and 45,000 kilometres of water treatment mains that we maintain and service. And if you can just pop onto the next page. Thanks for that. And just touching a bit on that David touched on, just talk about summer really. So I think we've got flood risks and climate change emerging. In the last, I've got 2018, 2022, 25 and 26, we've had effectively hot weather events, drought and different scenarios emerging. So from our perspective, resilience during the summer is really, really important to sort of give you an idea of demand. So demand increases by 20% during the summer. So that 2 billion litres of water becomes 2.4 billion litres of water that we need to find every day. So that's where we really need to look at as a society around smart metering and making sure that we, I suppose, drive down demand. And from a leakage perspective, quite a lot of questions around leakage. Severn Trent is one of few water companies that are achieving its leakage target at the moment. So that's around 20% leakage across our estate. And we're really focused on fix and find and use innovation to continue driving that down. And then you can pop onto the next slide. Next one again. So as Brian's touched on, as an organisation, EPA is basically the performance metrics set by the Environment Agency, and there are 7, I suppose, clear categories of performance, and from pollutions to discharge management to sludge management. And as an organisation, we work really, really hard, and we're one of the only water companies to achieve 4-star status for 6 years in a row. And during that period, the targets are getting tighter, and within the new regulatory regime, we've now got a broader suite of metrics. So something as an organisation we're really proud of, but work really hard on. RAGs I'll touch on a little bit in the presentation, and then spills is at the bottom. So obviously spills is quite, I suppose, a public measure at the moment, and we've reorganized the business around spills. So we now have around 300 people working on the spills program within Severn Trent, absolutely dedicated to reducing spills. And just, yeah, I suppose for 2025's performance, we were down to an average of 15 spills based on 25 the year before. And one of the comments we have quite a lot, it was very dry in 2025. But when we look at the average rainfall across the year, it was effectively equivalent to the year before. And then when we sort of, do the assessment on performance, we can really see, I suppose, differentiate between rainfall and the interventions we make, and we are seeing a benefit on spills, but absolutely recognise there's more to do. And then on to the next page. This is where we again need more support from a planning, government, local authority perspective. So first of all, on automatic right to connect. So just to sort of clarify our position, the water companies aren't a statutory consultee within the within the right to connect. So we effectively react to, I suppose, growth, and do not have, I suppose, the ability to block, I suppose, connections onto the network. And where we'd like to go is things like, I suppose, looking at Welsh Government. So within Welsh Government, the local authorities again manage SUDs as an example. So they manage the standards associated with SUDs, the maintenance of those SUDs and so on. So there's much more control in mind around SUDs management, and also the planning process for the right to connect. Wet wipes, really pleased again that we've got plastic wet wipes, I suppose, in the process of being banned. That happens from spring 2027. And just from my perspective, I'm working within the sewer industry. If you remember the earbuds, so the plastic earbuds at the front end of the sewage treatment works, they'd be absolutely littered everywhere 5 to 6 years ago. They've gone to disposable earbuds now, and you actually don't see any of that at the front end of the sewage treatment works. They actually get treated as part of the process. So I'm hoping that we'll have a similar sort of outcome by banning plastic wet wipes. And then Brian has touched on the Cunliffe review. So there's a new regulatory regime being passed through government as we speak. There are 84 changes in there that impact the water companies. We absolutely welcome all of those changes, that we feel they're really good for the sector and for the environment and for long-term investment. Then on to the next page, please. So get River Positive. So if you drop onto our website, the organisation has galvanised, I suppose, behind 5 pledges that we've committed to within the organisation. And there's, I suppose, 2 purposes for those pledges. One is to explain to our customers the focus areas from a Severn Trent perspective, and how are we going to improve river health, and for organisationally for us to align internally our cultures and behaviour and investment into those, I suppose, the buckets and the pledges themselves. And to give you an example, pledge 1 is all about doing no harm from our assets. So that's our storm overflows, pollutions, EPA performance. right through to Pledge 5 then, which is our commitment to transparency with our customers. So that's where we're starting to publish real-time data onto our maps. So Brian's touched on it, the EDM monitors, which I'll come on to in a second. But the pledges, if you drop onto the website, they're a really good way of understanding our plans around river health. Then on to the next page. So yeah, what have we achieved in the last 2 to 3 years? I think first of all, we've undertaken 2,700 interventions around overflows. So that's either flow segregation, nature-based solutions, increasing capacity on our sewage treatment works, or looking at other innovation. And some of it is as simple as installing water butts on small areas to just try to slow down the flow of water into the network. Spills I've touched on, we've sort of reduced those by 49% year on year, and are really confident we'll have another really good performance this year. And then for regions rivers, again, Brian's touched on it. I suppose contrary to what a lot of popular speculation, you know, for things like phosphate, ammonia, and overall river health, we are moving in the right direction. But again, we absolutely recognise there's more to do. And the next 5 years for us, so AMP8 from a Severn Trent perspective is the biggest AMP that we've ever delivered as a private water company. So we're up to £15 billion worth of investment in the next 5 years, which has partly driven the increase in employees from sort of 5,500 to 11,000 employees across the business. But I think that investment is long overdue. We recognise that, but it's a great opportunity for us to deliver some brilliant outcomes by the end of 2030. So really the focus for us is to continue to reduce the use of storm overflows, and I'll come on to that in a second, and also improving sewage treatment standards. Again, as Brian's touched on, he jumped a lot of my thought here, but the Environment Agency, I suppose, ultimately used the River Water Quality Index to define to us what we need to do to improve. We then seek funding for that and then deliver that within a regulatory committed date. So that's a really fixed program once we've agreed it that we have to deliver on. And that's where we then take lower permits as we describe them. So the way that we manage our assets, we have a permit and it has to operate within certain conditions. And the permit conditions on things like phosphorus are becoming lower and lower within the sector, which ultimately provides the less phosphorus we put into the watercourses, the less algae and food source. So we actually improve the river health. And the other area we're focused on is fitting 1,000 river water quality monitors in, which is an absolutely massive undertaking. And I think from memory, I think there's around 450, I suppose, Environment Agency sort of monitors in the Midlands, in the rivers. And we're looking to install 10,000 here. And that really is upstream and downstream of our assets. And again, will be published on the maps. And I think that will give us very, very good insight into the river health. And I think some of it will inform our investment plans where there are, I suppose, areas that aren't quite performing to the areas we think they are. But I think it'll perform a much richer data set on what is impacting the health of rivers. And again, I think that's where we'll need a collaborative forum then to look at what do we do about that, you know, that ammonia that's coming from agriculture or road runoff and so on. And then the next page. The next page again, sorry. So I think RNAGs we've touched on, but just to describe RNAGs, so rivers not achieving good status, some metric that's defined and managed by the Environment Agency, includes things like biology, chemistry, water sufficiency in the rivers. And ultimately we get an output of that, which then attributes that to either agriculture, the water sector, which then drives the improvement plans. And since about 2020, we were around 24% RNAGs associated with Severn Trent. We're now down to less than 9% and are firmly committed with the WINEP plan that we touched on earlier, that we'll get down to less than 2% RNAGs in our region. And those will predominantly be in the Birmingham area, where we've got a massive strategic sewage treatment works. And we're looking at, are there different ways of driving the environmental outcome that isn't sort of grey concrete or chemistry? So predominantly the RNAGs in Leicestershire will be resolved. The next page. I think we could just jump on one to speed up. So yeah, so this is, I suppose, a slightly different cut of the slide that sort of Brian presented earlier. But within Leicestershire, we've got 445 rivers not achieving good status. 80 of those are attributable to Severn Trent Water, which is around 18% of that. 27 of those have actually been delivered and resolved by investment on things like phosphate reduction on permits. And we've got plans basically for the remainder for 2030. And at this point in time, we're around 12.7%. And again, as an organisation, we're looking at how do we now support things like agriculture. So we have what we call a STEPS programme within Severn Trent. So we engage and provide the farm community with, I suppose, investment around pesticide removal. How can they farm differently to stop using so much nutrients in that? And that's been really successful for us. And that is a win-win, because ultimately when we come to treat that water, we've got less pesticides to remove or less nutrients to remove. So that catchment approach is definitely the way forward. And then the next slide. That top one's just a nice image of a continuous water sonde. So the 1,000 monitors that I talked about earlier. So they are real-time monitors that will basically present data onto a map that the Environment Agency can view. We can look at internally, customers can review. So that program will be delivered by 2030, and we're up to around 60 to 70 monitors in the watercourse as we speak. So quite complex technology. We're learning quite a lot around that. It's never been done before. But yeah, I think it'll bring a real insight into river health ultimately. And the next slide. Next one. So these are the combined storm overflows. So we've got 311 combined storm overflows within Leicestershire. We've completed 442 interventions on those already, whether that's removing excess flow out of the system, as I say, creating capacity, making sure that we can take more flows through our sewage treatment works. And yeah, that's been really successful in driving down that. We still have 67 combined storm overflows that are spilling greater than 20 times. And we absolutely recognise, that isn't, that is our priority. And that's the focus area for us at the moment. And again, within 2030, as part of that, I suppose, WINEP framework, we have a plan to reduce those spills down to an acceptable level. The next slide. So that's the spills in Leicestershire for 23, 24 and 25. And what ultimately we have year on year is a 49% reduction. Our commitment now is that we absolutely need to weatherproof those spills and actually make sure that we maintain that performance going forward. And back to the regulatory framework that Brian touched on earlier, one of the changes that government are making is effectively no deterioration. So within our permits, they look at the average spill that a overflow has spilled down, and it's effectively locked in at that point and can never deteriorate. So that will ensure that the sector doesn't drift back into, I suppose, pre-focus on storm overflows. Then we have quite a lot of questions around the EDMs. So I suppose reflecting on the EDM monitors. So these are the monitors that we put on the storm overflows. They are relatively new. So they've been, I suppose, in earnest out onto the storm overflows in the last 5 years. They are quite tricky environments. You can imagine having monitors sitting in, sewers in the middle of Birmingham, 8-9 meters down, quite a toxic environment. So the technology's moved on quite a lot, but really that's given us really good insight now around the performance of the storm overflows and when they are spilling and for how long the overflows are spilling for. And you can see our EDM operability, which is again a key regulatory target. We're up to 99%. So 99% of the time, the monitors are functioning correctly. And when they do fail, we have basically a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service to get those repaired and reinstalled. It's quite interesting as well, sort of telecoms when you're working 8 meters down and somebody parks a car on top of it, you lose sign of it. So when you look at the map, sometimes you will see the pins are grey, and it's for quite genuine sort of, I suppose, communication type issues, and occasionally they do fail. And the last couple of slides. So just as a I suppose context really. So from a planning perspective, quite a lot of questions around growth. So we now have a statutory drains and wastewater management plan that we developed. So that's a fairly new tool that we now develop, and it looks to building growth, climate change, urban creep into our planning process. And that's something that we engage with DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and Ofwat that seeks funding. We have a very similar plan on the Water Resource Management Plan, which is around sufficiency of water supply. And then from a Leicestershire, if you just jump on 2 pages, sorry. So I suppose some of the key sort of stats around Leicestershire and future investments. So OneLip is one of our strategic works, and it's looking at a £300 million investment programme in the next 3 years, which is targeted, first of all, at growth and being able to take more flows through that works and reducing the water quality. So that's reducing the permit from 1 milligram per litre to 0.2. We've got 8 other quality schemes going on in Leicestershire this AMP. And then we're also looking, I suppose it's South East Leicester, isn't it, around sort of growth forecast and modelling, because we definitely recognise there are growth in those areas, and then building that into our next planning cycle to look at additional funding for that. And then Packington is the other big scheme that we're looking at, which is transferring flows from the River Mease across to the River Tame to ensure that we deliver the water quality outcomes defined, ultimately working with the Environment Agency. And then next 2 slides again. And yeah, last 2 slides. Just as insight on how do we work with communities. So we have developed a team of river rangers, which is managed by John, who's in the chair there. And we basically, the role of the river rangers is community engagement, upskilling communities, working with angling clubs. They also do absolutely thousands of inspections to look at, are there any pollutions that the network is not aware of? And just on that point as well, one of the things that we've done quite well in water is to make the network smart, as we're calling it. So we've got sensors on the network to understand where we have a burst main, where we got pressure issues. The sewer network has been relatively unintelligent, I'll use the words, and we are following a similar process now with the sewer network, where we're installing more and more monitors onto the network. So we've installing 9,000 monitors at the moment to understand, have we got blockages, have we got flow issues on that network, have we got I suppose fats, oils and greases building up in there and so on. So how do we make the sewer network smart and then be able to manage it better is the next phase of planning for us. And then the last slide is around our community flood team. So again, I suppose our customers understanding the role of Severn Trent, the Environment Agency and the local authorities has been quite, I would say, quite confused. So the role of this team is really explaining to communities and customers, I suppose, who has the accountability for surface water flooding, fluvial flooding, for, I suppose, our sewer system flooding. So a lot of it's about educating and upskilling our customers. And then the other part of the role in flood, it's the worst thing our customers experience is being flooded, whether it's internal sewer flooding or external sort of, flooding. We absolutely recognise the worst thing to do. So we are looking, or that team's role is then to sort of parachute, for want of a better word, into those areas and help our customers with sort of tactical interventions and support during those events. I think that's it from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. I'd like to thank all 3 of you for what are very detailed and interesting presentations. We do have one more update to come from Mr. Jonathan Glaram from Anglian Water, who joins us online. Can you hear us there?
I can indeed. Can you hear me all right?
Wonderful, yes, we can hear you.
Good. Right, I can share my screen actually, because I've got a few slides that I can take us through, if that is helpful. Bear with me. There you go. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Brilliant. Good. So for those that don't know me, so I'm Jonathan Glaram, so I'm Head of Environmental Outcomes at Anglian Water. And I've just got a very short slide deck here, not a huge amount of detail, but very happy to take any questions that anybody's got. So just similar to Jason, just to kind of explain kind of who we are and where we cover. So yeah, kind of over 4 million customers, really large supply area from the Humber to the Thames, and from Leicestershire across the kind of lower Stoft and on the East Coast. So, and as you can see on the map there, we only cover a very small portion of Leicestershire, and we only supply wastewater services for the county. So we don't supply any water services. I mean, you can see there more generally the kind of the extent of the assets that we deal with, kind of very very similar to what Severn Trent kind of look to manage. Tens of thousands of kilometres of sewers, thousands of what we call water recycling centres, so wastewater treatment works in old money, and lots of pumping stations, principally further to the east, because we don't have a huge amount of gravity on our side in the east of England. So lots of pumping stations to move water and wastewater around. So and as I think is probably reflected in a number of the questions, our region is really particularly vulnerable, and I think this was picked up in a number of the questions, not least around kind of demand for water and the kind of challenges around sort of leakage and so forth, population increases and how we manage growth, and I just touched on this earlier, but obviously the impact of the recent summer and how kind of dry that's been and what that's meant, both from a kind of water supply perspective, but also what that's meant for the environment as well. So in terms of our kind of roles and responsibilities, so this was touched on earlier, but obviously there are multiple kind of acts that kind of play a role in terms of both managing flood risk and also kind of our role within the environment. So we touched on earlier around the kind of Environment Act and the kind of introduction of that. So I won't dwell on that because that's been covered already. Obviously, the Water Industry Act is core for us in terms of both how we kind of drain existing areas and how we kind of manage future kind of connections. And then, obviously, importantly for this committee, the Flood and Water Management Act, so which I know very well, but obviously within that we have the kind of duty to cooperate, and we go much wider than just that as well. So, and obviously the work that we do with the Lead Local Flood Authority team at Leicestershire is kind of baked into that work, into that act. So, and I also just wanted to touch on kind of, I suppose, our long-term planning that we do. So, and this was introduced in the Environment Act with regards to the drainage and wastewater management planning, but we've done water resource management planning for a very long time. So, and we take that kind of long-term planning kind of really seriously to kind of give us that kind of future focus over the next minimum of sort of 25 years, if not longer, to try and understand how we can be as resilient as possible to the kind of changing demands that we have from a changing climate, an increase in population, and the different requirements that are placed on us to protect and support the environment. So that is all baked into our water resource management planning, drainage and wastewater management planning, and the work of our Water Industry National Environment Programme, our WINEP. So, and I'll come on to that in a bit later. I've also included on there just what we call kind of safer every day, and I think this is important. I'm sure others would agree with me here. Is that we now have the biggest programme of work that we have ever had since privatisation, which means more people doing more work all the time, and we need to ensure that we do that safely as possible. So it's absolutely crucial to everything that we do now that we do it in the safest possible way, and that everybody gets home at the end of the day. The other thing, which I think was touched on earlier, but obviously this is the kind of programme of work that we kind of undertake at the moment. What we have is a kind of major programme of water sector reform happening that kind of DEFRA are trying to push through at the minute, and that is likely to change how we kind of plan for the future. And personally, I think that's likely to be in a really positive step forward. Not least the fact that it means we plan more collaboratively with others, and we take a far more kind of catchment-based approach to the work that we do. So we're not working in silos. But instead, we're working kind of as collaboratively as possible with all other kind of stakeholders. So not least everybody in the room today. So kind of local authorities, Environment Agency and others, but also some of our other kind of core stakeholders, not least the kind of environmental NGOs and in particular our customers. So in terms of, I'll just touch quickly now just on things from a kind of, I suppose, a flood risk side, and then from a kind of environment side. So from a, I suppose, a kind of how we manage our network to kind of reduce the likelihood of flooding, what we do is significant, and our teams are out there 24/7 trying to manage the network. And as you can see on the screen, they are dealing with significant numbers of jobs every year. A number of those are kind of planned jobs, but a lot of them are kind of reactive jobs. And in particular, from a flooding perspective, the vast majority, I think it's over 80% of flooding incidents are caused by blockages. And often those are blockages that could have been prevented. So those are things like, and we've been talked about earlier, things like wet wipes, for example, and they have a horrible habit of clinging on to fat and grease that's poured down drains, and then they cause, I'm sure everyone's seen in the press in the past, but these, what are beautifully termed fatbergs, and those cause blockages. So our teams are out there all the time trying to kind of manage and deal with those blockages. Wherever we can, we undertake planned and kind of proactive maintenance to kind of remove blockages where we know we might have hotspots, and kind of regular kind of repeat sort of offending kind of locations that we can get out and clear stuff. And obviously we will prioritise those based on where there might be either a pollution or a flooding, whether that's internal or external flooding. So, and as was mentioned earlier, similar to the work that Severn Trent are doing, we are also trying to make our kind of sewer network far smarter than it's ever been before. So, tens of thousands of monitors go into the network so that we can, kind of monitor it almost in a real-time basis where there are kind of issues and challenges. So we can quickly see if a blockage is developing, and we can get out there before it actually causes an impact now. And we couldn't do that a few years ago without the kind of sensors that we now have in place. So the kind of technology and the innovation that's kind of coming into the industry will really have, or is already having a kind of significant benefit both for customers and the environment. So, and these are just a few pictures of the kind of the work that our team deal with. I'm sure everybody's seen many of these in kind of flooding incidents, but you can see some of the kind of blockages that they deal with there, and no doubt the kind of use of tankers and sort of pumping to support operations on the ground. So and I just wanted to include this from a kind of flooding perspective. So some of you may be aware of Kibworth Mead Academy School, which flooded very badly a number of years ago. It actually flooded in the midst of GCSE examinations, and all the children had to exit the exam when that happened. So we've been working with yourselves at the County Council and with the school directly to install a number of kind of rainwater planters to try and slow the flow of water. So historically, all the water from the school, so all the water from the roofs and the area around was discharging into the combined sewer system, and then that would become overloaded and flood up through the schools. So this way we're kind of slowing the flow of water. But not only are we doing that, and you can see it on the right hand side, the kind of quote from Kate, who works at the school, just saying, look, what an impact they've had on the school as well. So they're not just providing kind of flood risk mitigation, they're not just kind of slowing the flow of water into the combined network and potentially reducing kind of any spills downstream, but they have a benefit for the children as well. The gardening club are using them. The students have really kind of engaged with it and now really taking an interest in kind of flooding and kind of managing flood risks. So a really nice example from kind of Leicestershire of the sort of work that we do with yourselves and others to manage risk. So just in terms of enhancing the environment from a WINEP perspective, so our AMP8 WINEP programme is really significant. So our overall sort of programme of work this AMP is about £11 billion, and of that, more than £2 billion will be spent on our WINEP. So within that, there's over kind of 4,000 commitments that we're looking to deliver, which is by far and away our biggest ever kind of WINEP programme, and more than double that we did last AMP. So you can see kind of how significant that is. And I think it was touched on earlier in terms of just what that means in terms of deliverability, right? So, you know, we've had to kind of massively scale up both, you know, resource in terms of kind of design and delivery, but also in terms of people on the ground to kind of support that work. So, and that investment will deliver a whole range of different outcomes, which, you know, will have a benefit either to the environment or to customers or both. So that will be kind of reduction of storm overflows, you know, improvements in water quality through kind of phosphate removal, you know, increasing kind of capacity at kind of water recycling centres to accommodate growth and so forth. So, and the work that we do with, you know, kind of our farming community to kind of manage sort of nitrate inputs into land, and things like kind of, you know, kind of river restoration work that we're doing. So, so really kind of important program work. And if I just go on the next screen, you can see a bit more clearly the image that was on the right there, around what is included within the WINEP. So we've touched a lot on kind of storm overflows and spills already. Bathing water quality, obviously not so relevant for Leicestershire, although it's worth noting that Rutland is obviously right on your doorstep, and we do have 2 bathing waters at Rutland, both of which are excellent, I might add, which is really positive. So you're not too far from a bathing water, which is good. I mentioned nutrient removal, and I've got another case study in a second on the next slide around that. Jason talked about the kind of water quality monitoring, so the kind of continuous water quality monitoring that we have to now install, which will be, you know, again, thousands of monitors both upstream and downstream of any kind of continuous water discharge. And then a lot of that's kind of on the wastewater side, but obviously WINEP also includes the water side, which, you know, as I said earlier, we don't supply water for Leicestershire, but a big part of the programme of work for us will be thinking about abstraction and kind of river restoration and kind of ensuring that we've got good quality water where we need it. So, and then just my final slide, just quickly, just this last case study. So we are in the process of actually doing a phosphate removal scheme at Foxton Water Recycling Centre, so just outside Market Harborough. So you can see on the right hand side, it's a very small site. But as was mentioned earlier, you know, we need to meet a tighter permit there, and so we're looking at installing new processes on site to reduce phosphates there, which will obviously have a significantly kind of positive impact on the local river environment. So and that work's ongoing as we speak. So so I'll leave it there for now. Very happy to take any questions and anything further that anybody would like to know. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Again, another very interesting presentation. Before I open up for questions, I just want to check if any of the officers or the lead member, Mr. Tilbury, have any additional comments at this point. And in particular, I'd just like to check with Anne. How long do you think you'll need for agenda item 9?
I would think 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. That gives me a good idea how long.
If that's okay with you.
I'm here as long as you want me. Okay. So any additional comments from you guys? I think we've got Joe and Gil online as well. No. I think Jana.
I've just got a couple of questions when you're ready, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, well, go ahead.
Thanks once again for the agencies that have come, and thank you, Dave, for meeting myself and the leader last week about Section 19 action plans. That was very productive. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is about planning, and obviously we've all got our own opinions about this. And but in your opinion, obviously we're talking about how like flooding is going to increase in the next few years. How do you think planning laws can improve to like mitigate the flooding in the future? Obviously, good planning can help flooding, but obviously bad planning makes it worse. And for instance, we've got a lead member of Syston there, and the floodplains have been built on over the years, and some more are due to be built on in the next few years. I know you're only advisory on planning, but if you had a magic wand, what would you do to make sure that the planning works actually help the at-risk areas? Obviously, we're moving forward to LGR soon, and this could be like where a new authority emerges, and this could be like a reset that we need. That's my first question. Thank you, Chair.
I'll take that, Chair. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
So, believe it or not, the mechanisms already exist in the planning system to ensure that the issues you've described don't happen. So whether you need a reform of that planning system, I don't know if that's the answer. There's a couple of issues to bear in mind. One is we've had a legacy of building on the floodplain forever in this country. Since early settlements settled next to rivers for water supply and defence, etc. Since National Planning Policy Framework was introduced, however, the mechanisms within the planning system to say any planning development should not increase flood risk to third parties. It's already in that planning legislation. So what we have to do is be rigorous and ensure that developments that come in adhere to that, and that the developments are fit for purpose. They're sustainable, they don't increase flood risk to others, and they are safe from flood risk themselves. Now, it's a difficult issue, isn't it? We need popular consensus is we need more houses. Where you're going to build them, there's a lot of floodplain in the country. Inevitably, you're going to have some applications that are on the floodplain. So what we need to do is make sure that the flood risk assessments that come in with them are adherent to planning policy that already exists and ensures that they will not increase flood risk to third parties.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, Adam?
Yeah, thanks ever so much for answering that. This one's a specific question, actually, been asked by a Great Glen Flood Group. Is to essentially the Environment Agency and Severn Trent together. Obviously, JBA and being commissioned by Davidson's to do undertake a survey on Great Glen's flood resilience, and they're just asking if a specific individual at the AEA and Severn Trent will be there to oversee like the implementation and recommendations of that report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, who'd like to take that?
I can take that one.
Thank you.
Well, it's difficult to say, Councillor Tilbury, without knowing what the recommendations in the report are. What I will say is that, look, there are, brilliant consultants out there, very intelligent people. There's no fool's pride in the Environment Agency that we won't listen to recommendations from the consultant. What they come up with, what they suggest, whether that can be implemented is a different question altogether. And I'm really unsighted on what that is. But of course, we will listen and we'll provide somebody to attend the flag and discuss the report as willing. But yeah, as I say, there's no fool's pride. Where there might be some brilliant recommendations there that we haven't already thought of, or there might be some recommendations that we have already thought of, but unfortunately have been unable to deliver for one of many reasons.
Can I have one quick follow-up then? I'll open it.
Quick follow.
So they're just saying, once these are done, will there be like a specific contact for them, Dave, that they can speak to about this? Because I think they said like in the past they're just struggling to get the same person to speak to on like a similar issue. Thank you.
I mean, we can provide a specific point of contact for the flag group. Yes. So yes, we can do that.
Could you press your microphone, please?
I always forget that, sorry. Yeah, if you use John McGuinness as the key point within Severn Trent to understand the recommendations of that report, we'd be keen to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Is that it, Adam?
Yep, open it up to the floor, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Jana, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Sorry, Chair. No, it was just when you mentioned about working there, obviously the lead local flood authority sits within my area and obviously under Anne. And I just wanted to recognise some of those joint projects. I think the work over the last few years, some of it is very local, but they make a big difference, don't they, as well? So there's lots of work that we need to do and is on the list and on the recommendations. But there's been some really positive collaborative work. And it was just to thank partners for attending today and for that work that's gone on, really.
Okay, thanks for that. So, I'll open it up for questions. It's 20 past now. You've all got till 10 to, so it's about half an hour. The first one was Craig. He's had to go early. Nick has got the first question.
Thank you. I've got two very, very simple questions for you. Balancing ponds, suds. Whenever you contact someone about them being overgrown, don't hold water and everything else, everyone passes you on to somebody else. No one actually says, yes, we're responsible for that. It's impossible to get an answer. We have floods down the road here, quite bad ones out of Rothley Brook, and they're just empty because they're full of reeds and everything else. So how do we actually get to the bottom of who is responsible to maintaining these suds, and who do we contact, whether in a state that they need repair? That's my first question. That's the easy one.
I look forward to the difficult one. Well, it's interesting. Just looking at the eye contact, you're directing that to me, and I'm already thinking, don't just say it's somebody else. However, the Environment Agency aren't responsible for the maintenance of suds features. It's been, if I'm honest, it's been a particular thorny issue for many, many years. When a developer comes in with proposals for sustainable drainage systems, which we encourage, and we've actively pushed for developments to include because they're good for the environment and they're good for flood risk. Who is going to adopt and maintain them has been a real difficult barrier to get across, because traditionally the water companies didn't have the authority and legislation to be able to take them on. Lead local flood authorities didn't either. So I believe it's still sat with Parliament, an act to make the lead local flood authorities the SAB, the advisory body that will adopt and maintain suds. But until then, my understanding, and I'll defer to the lead local authorities, but it can be a mishmash. You could have a development company who have been given the responsibility, and then it's who is that development company. It could be the lead local authority might have some responsibilities and have taken some on, or these days, I believe Severn Trent are now taking on some, and I know Anglian were proactive in this space. So the unfortunate answer is, I can't give you a direct answer because it could be one of a number of authorities. But what I will say is I completely understand, and it's a frustration we hear all the time of being passed from one to another. Unfortunately, there's no simple answer I can give that'll clarify that, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks. Anne, yes.
Just to add on that, and I'd absolutely back up Dave on this one. It is a bit of a mishmash, his technical term, not mine. I mean, fundamentally, it could be, a housing developer. It could be us as the highway authority. For instance, we've just built the Mowbray Distributor Road. There's 10 along there. That's our responsibility to do it. But, as Dave mentioned very much, mentioned in what he said is there was a proposal through legislation, and it's Regulation 3 under whatever act it is. And if that's enacted, it means we as a lead local flood authority would be that approval body and be responsible for maintaining. That has never been enacted. And we suspect that's because, and we've been very clear as a sector to government, you'd need to give us the funding in order to do that, because you'll know just from your patches how many suds there will be, around new developments or even older developments, etc. To take those on and maintain them is no, small task. We'd need to be funded for that, and I suspect that's what's holding up enacting that part of the legislation, which is unfortunate because, as you all know, we come from time and time again issues about management for the very reason you're raising the question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Happy?
Yes, definitely.
Very good. Okay, the next question is from Dr. Hill.
Thank you, Chair. My thing's in two parts. One is the Environment Agency, because I've had issues in Market Harbour, where I live and represent, and a chunk of the river's mine, not all of it. People having issues with things in the river and they don't know who to contact, and we get passed around from pillar to post, same thing, but between the environment, or not getting any response from the Environment Agency. My second part is to Anglian Water, bless them, who deal with our waste but not our water supply, not only in Market Harbour but a fair chunk of the county. So when they declared a hosepipe ban, I got a text from Anglian Water saying you've got a hosepipe ban, and I ended up on the local radio telling people there wasn't a hosepipe ban because the good people at Severn Trent never declared a hosepipe ban. And I actually met somebody and they'd had a family row over the issue. So, and I then got other emails from Anglian Water saying your water supply has been restored because there was a problem over the border in Northamptonshire. So my plea to Anglian Water is please sort out your targeting messaging to actually take into account the weirdness we have in my part of Leicestershire and the area surrounding it, because it certainly confused a heck of a lot of people who weren't quite sure where they stood. It's a weird anomaly due to history and I suspect geography, but that was my two things. Thank you, Chair.
Very good. Was there a question in there? Yeah, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, so when it comes to maintenance of watercourses, by law, the maintainer of a watercourse, and that includes removal of blockages, lies with what's called the riparian owner. So it's termed the riparian owner, and that essentially is whoever owns the land that the watercourse is running through. Now, if that's a small watercourse in somebody's garden, you would say it's probably a reasonable expectation that they would maintain that and they would remove blockages from it. When you get to bigger watercourses, such as the Old Lady Trent, we can't say with any reasonable authority whatsoever, we expect a landowner to remove a blockage from the River Trent because it would be unreasonable and dangerous. So the Environment Agency have permissive powers, which means we can use our powers to come in and remove blockages on main rivers. I don't know the specifics of the it's the Welland. Okay. Now, when we decide whether we're going to do that or not, usually comes down to if it's creating a blockage that we deem is creating a flood risk and needs immediate removal. If it is, then we remove it. But sometimes there is a difference of opinion as to whether a blockage is causing an immediate flood risk, whether it's reasonable and responsible for the riparian owner to remove that, while the Environment Agency uses permissive powers. The Welland drains to our colleagues' operational area, our Links and Northants colleagues. But what I can do is I can take your details and I can pass that on to the operations manager, the equivalent in that patch, and just make sure that you get a response and a reply. And if I just very quickly, Chair, just say, if you have a blockage, there is two ways you can very easily report it now. There's a phone number which has always been there, which is 0800 80 70 60, 0800 80 70 60, and an operator will be there and take your details and go through to our system. And you can also do it online now. You can report a blockage online. Just look for the .gov UK service, report a blockage, and it'll come up very easily. So there are ways that you can do that, and we will get somebody to assess the risk. What I can't guarantee is that we will agree on the level of the risk that blockage is creating. And your second question was for Anglian, I believe.
Yeah, with regards to that messaging, I will take that away, Dr. Hill, and see. Obviously, not my area of expertise at all, but I will make sure that's mentioned, and no doubt our IT team will look into that. Thank you for raising that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David and Jonathan. You happy? Yeah. Next question is from Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the people who presented today. Really, really interesting. So I've got a few questions. If I just start with a couple that I think are maybe more EA related. So the first one is about the Woodbrook scheme. I know this is very site specific, but it was mentioned in the report, and I know you mentioned it in your presentation. I understand that the hydraulic modelling has had to be revised, and details of that will come in September. So when might we be looking at the revised dates for the whole scheme, potentially? When might they actually come out?
So the programme completion for delivery of service, so ready for service or in operation, is March 2028.
Okay, and that's not likely to be revised, or you can't say at this point?
I'd like to reserve judgment on that. Okay. Unfortunately, with complicated projects such as this, you do see slippage in programmes. You'll probably be aware, I guess, from the questions, we have had slippage in this scheme, but it's something that we're really focused on, and it sounds corny, but it is a strategic objective that we do not have any more slippage in the scheme, if possible.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, it's about, I understand there are no plans currently to look at lowering levels of reservoirs to mitigate against flooding. But are there any plans to look at the modelling that would determine whether that kind of lowering could potentially address flood risk in a reservoir like Switherland, for example? And I appreciate it's really complex because I think the reservoir dropped to about 40% this summer, I think. But I just wondered, and I wondered how that process works. Would the EA request that kind of modelling, or is it something that maybe Severn Trent would do on their own initiative?
So I think just to address your first point first, obviously the reservoir profiles, we have to have confidence that they'll recover during the winter period. So the sort of the risks of managing reservoirs at lower level in winter present us with some supply risks in the summer. Generally, the Environment Agency, I suppose, dictate the reservoir releases and the compensation in them, so that's defined by the Environment Agency, and we're then instructed to increase, decrease compensation values. I think it is something that we can look at, and is there any options on this sort of Switherland's a specific reservoir you're looking at, is it? So
yeah, it is.
I think we can take that away as an action, and just being really clear, it's sort of in control in mind as the Environment Agency, but I'm sure we can work together and come back with a response on that.
Yeah, and just to update you, so by coincidence, we actually met with Severn Trent last week to discuss what kind of status we are in looking at this.
Okay.
So what we've done in the Environment Agency, we've put 2 river gauges in the downstream water courses. We need more evidence and we need more data. It appears to be a no-brainer. Well, if you lower the reservoir level, it's going to reduce flood risk, and I get the simplicity. However, to do that operation, we would need a lot more evidence of what actual flood risk benefits would it provide, and you've got to do that in collaboration with Severn Trent because it's their asset, and they have different priorities to us in terms of they need to supply the population with potable water supply. So it is probably a lot more complicated than what it would appear to be. But what I can assure you is that that is on the radar. However, the hydraulic modelling which we would do needs data first, and that's going to take at least 2 years before we get that data.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add to that as well, because I've looked into this as well. Reservoirs by their own design constrain the amount of water that comes down because they only have a certain amount of capacity that they'll let through. So in essence, they already are preventing or helping to reduce the risk of flooding. And the reality is, and we found this with the Derwent reservoirs, where we do sometimes ask Severn Trent to try and lower them in anticipation of excess water coming down. But you often find that you've had a deluge of rain all the time. So letting more water down the network has to be really carefully done, because you could enhance flood, and by in itself, by letting down the water, you increase the risk of flooding. So it's a really complicated thing. But as Dave said, we are looking at it to try and see, all the time we're trying to look at ways to improve and reduce the risk of flooding.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And if I may, Chair, just a couple of quick final ones. I wondered what an acceptable level of spills might be, because I really appreciate the work that's going towards reducing spills, but you mentioned maybe to an acceptable level, and I just wondered what that might look like, whether there is a figure that we were working towards, and finally, the monitors, the additional river monitors. We don't actually have any official bathing sites in Leicestershire, as I know you recognised, and I know that they would go in around SSI sites and things like that, but there are areas that are very popular for water sports and so on. So I just wondered how you would determine, how you would use some of that data to work out where those monitors would go. Thank you.
Can I just remind Ms Gray, your mic's still on?
I'll get used to the mic. Just with regards to this, was the storm overflow targets, that there are a prescribed set of targets already set within the Environment Act. So things like bathing rivers have a target of less than 1 spill during a bathing season. And then we're up to sort of 20 35, I think it is, that there's a government target of less than 10 spills as an average, as a target. So there's several different targets set dependent on the receiving water course. And then there's more generic targets set against, I suppose, the water sectors for longer term sort of objectives. So yes, there are targets. And in relation to the river water quality monitors, they are predominantly focused around sort of, you know, sensitive sites, triple SIs and so on. But the headline plan is that they will be rolled out along all of our asset base over the next 7 years. So there's another raft of monitors coming in the next AMP period. So effectively we'll be monitoring the vast majority of our assets. But again, if you've got any specific areas that you're concerned around, we you know, please reach out to us and we can have a look at that, and where either communicate that it is in the AMP 8 plan or commit to that in the AMP 9 plan.
Can I just also add, it's acceptable levels is variant right across wherever we are, and the infrastructure, you know, has to cope with huge deluges of rain. And actually it is understood that when those spills occur, when you've got massive flooding, that you've diluted. I mean, it's never ideal. We wouldn't want it. You know, the ideal is zero, but we can't achieve that. So this is, importantly, it's about dry spills when you've got dry periods of weather, and overflows occur then when you're not diluting and flushing the system through. So the aspiration is to really get down as minimal to the minimum we possibly can. And that's why we don't say spill targets, we talk about levels of phosphates and levels of ammonia and things like that, which then the water company has to understand how it's going to achieve that through its infrastructure change. So there isn't really a clear answer to that, other than we really are trying to drive it all down. And it's particularly the dry weather ones that we really want to cut out. And that's where enforcement action can take place.
Okay, thank you, David, Brian, and Jason once again. We're getting through them. There's five. I've got 5 more questions here, and we've got about 15 minutes. We may run over a little bit, but the next one is Ms. Pendlebury.
Okay. I told a number of the groups that I deal with that I was meeting you guys, and I have literally been inundated with questions. I won't inflict them all on you. Firstly, Environment Agency. The recurrent theme I'm getting through about Environment Agency is communication. A gentleman, a farmer who has tried to talk to you guys and says he's been pushed from pillar to post. He's looking for advice. It's not a spill, it's not an issue, it's a potential issue, but can't seem to find anyone to speak to. I also got that from a flooding issue elsewhere. They don't know who to speak to, they can't seem to find anyone, and they just get passed around. Is there some means of an identifiable person they can speak to? Not all of our farmers are IT fantastic, and they like to talk to a human being. The second one, you talked about flood defence projects, and I know there's a lot of work going on in Witherley. I apologise for making it ward specific, but you didn't mention it on your scheme of activities, but I know there's a lot of work between yourself and Severn Trent going on in Witherley. Have we got a projected date for completion on the works there? And I have a follow-up question,
Okay.
if I may.
I'll deal with the contact one. I have a group of people called catchment coordinators, and they have responsibility for certain patches, and I think that would be the best person. So I'll link with you afterwards, and we'll make that happen.
The Witherley, I'm afraid I'll have to take that away, and the reason being is Witherley is in our West Midlands operational patch, and I cover the East Midlands. So we did provide a briefing, and then we on the background for Witherley, but I don't have the specific details for that, I'm afraid. I do know I learned last week that Leicestershire County Council are doing some dredging on the main river section through Witherley, so they might have some more details as to when that'll be done, if that's the works you're referring to. But I apologise, I'd have to take that away.
Could I just ask my Severn Trent question?
Adam's just got one thing to add to that one.
Yeah, thank you. I will email you that. One of the officers and I are working on that at the moment, so I'll fill you in very shortly. Of course, I can. Yeah.
Quick follow-up.
It's actually, that was my Environment Agency question. You talked about having 9,000 sensors installed, 9,000 monitors installed. I've been asked, how do these report back to you, and how is that then communicated to the people as it's affected in the area? And you talk about working on future proofing, so pumping stations, Witherley comes to mind, but you talk about pumping stations, and if you've got a pumping station at capacity with future development planned, at what point would you, for example, put in a bigger pumping station or whatever it is you do to improve that? Thank you.
Good question. So yeah, just on to Witherley first of all. So obviously we have a bit of a challenging sewage pump station there that quite often goes underwater. Have checked in with the team. The site does operate underwater, so the pumps are, I suppose, weatherproofed, so the site is operating. What we're looking to do is now sort of how do we harden the network to avoid infiltration into that sewage pump station. So we definitely need to work on a collaborative view of how do we avoid, I suppose, fluvial flooding onto that pump station. It's a really good question on the sensor. So there's 9,000 new sensors going into the network. We've now started using a system called Storm Harvester, which is an AI tool. So we bring that signal in to a system called Storm Harvester, and it's intelligent enough, I suppose, to understand flow dynamics, and it learns from the patterns that it sees in the network. So it's I suppose an integrated process, and that then generates alarms to say something has changed in the sewer network, and that then generates a response to our operational teams to go out and investigate, do we have a partial blockage? So we see it internally as a proactive tool that is trying to identify blockages and pollutions before they happen, and it's at the moment the success rate is looking really, really positive, and a number of the other water companies, I know Anglian are using it as well. So there's a I suppose that's the next step on the smart network that we talked about. How can we, because the dynamics, if you think of looking into real-time monitors times 20,000 on the network 24/7, the data points are just, very difficult to interpret. So this is where we need to use these tools to help. So it's integrated into the response, generates an alarm, and then we respond to that. And then the question on growth into sewage pump stations and so on is really around us collaborating and understanding the growth schemes with the local authorities and departments, and then it forms one of two plans. Either there's a more tactical in-AMP plan for smaller schemes, or as part of the drains and waste management plans, we have a holistic look at growth in the areas that we then need to accommodate and build into the AMP plan, and then seek funding for that. So it's more of a long-term outlook, sort of 5 years plus, if you think of it that way. And there was a good point raised earlier on the planning process as well. If one of the things you can help us with, some of our sewage treatment works literally serve 2 people. So we think we've got these huge, sewage treatment works. It's when a population, properties develop from 2 to 8, that can make a significant difference to that sewage pump station. And back to spills, it's irrelevant whether one lip is spilling once, or you've got a small sewage treatment works that's impacting a sensitive water course. So I think the plea for us is not just large scale development, it's the smaller development as well that we need to consider.
Thank you, Jason. Next up we have Ms. Bottomley.
Thank you. So I just had a few questions. Quite a few of mine have already been asked, so that was great. When it comes to the EA's strategy, how much is that? Do you start with what would be the best case scenario, what you'd love to achieve, and then figure out funding, or do you get told this is the pot you've got, what can you do with it? Because obviously the strategy would be quite massively impacted. So are we looking at this is what we definitely need to do, and this, or is this what we can do with what we have, if that makes sense? And then, sorry, just on the riparian owners. I just had a quick question in terms of, is there any kind of support or structures in place? I know in my division we have quite a lot of people who would be classed as riparian owners, and there are constantly arguments about, well, it wasn't in my patch. We've had loads of rain and things have been washed down because people further upstream have not been looking after their patch. What kind of protections or things are there, if any, for residents in that situation? Thank you.
Yeah, and good questions as well. So the strategy is ambitious. It sets out what we need to do as a nation to combat the risks that we're all facing, and we will present the national risk and the global risk really to whoever's in government, and then policy will dictate what funds and what how we tackle that in terms of the provisions that we can be disseminated. So the strategy doesn't really get into money, it's more aspirations. These are the three ambitions of the strategy: climate resilient places, infrastructure and planning being better, and communities being prepared for flood risk. So it's definitely the former that you put forward. It's the strategy is there, and policy dictates what we can put towards that to combat the risk. The riparian owner, it's a good point that your constituents, if you like, are making. There's not really anything that prevents that from happening, other than the responsibility is the same for every landowner to maintain their stretch. So if somebody's not maintaining their stretch and they are upstream of somebody who is, then yes, it's a difficult local issue, but there's nothing really that can prevent that from happening. We do have enforcement powers. We try and avoid to use the enforcement powers on local civilians and residents, etc., because it can get messy, and often it's much better if you can collaborate and work these things out. But ultimately, sometimes it comes down to local disputes between riparian owners, and whether you go down legal routes or what have you, and it can get very messy. So yeah, that is a good question, but ultimately, if we all do our bit correctly, then that issue will be resolved.
Okay, thank you for that. We're happy, Ms. Bottomley? Yep, very good. We've got 4 more to go. Anne, are you okay, or do you need to be anywhere else? Okay, so we may overrun a little bit. The next question is from Mr. Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Mrs. Bottomley's nabbed one of my questions with the riparian owners one, so I'll go into this one. He said it is for the gentleman at the EIO, I'm afraid again. Sorry about that.
Very popular.
It's really on the back of Mr. Tilbury's question regarding planning policy. So I represent Syston, which has unfortunately flooded 3 times, the worst being January 2025. And I was just reading that the national planning policy for framework makes it clear that inappropriate development in areas at risk of flooding should be avoided. So there's a proposed development at South East Syston of 1,100 houses, and showing on the plans where that suds discharge into the river. So heavy rainfall water is going to travel down into the town. Were you consulted on this, and did you object to it at all? Because like myself and the flood group, local flood group, and the flood wardens are all extremely concerned that Syston's going to flood once this is built. Thank you.
And if I may say, that is a very common anxiety that we hear from many communities, particularly those that have got a flooding issue and a historical flooding, is new development will build that flood risk. So my first part of the answer would go back to what said to Councillor Tilbury, that the mechanisms are within the planning system to make sure that that development, however big it is, does not increase flood risk to others. And the way they do that is through the sustainable drainage techniques. And what they do, so we all know that concrete, water will run off concrete much faster than when off a green field. I'm presuming it's a greenfield site. Yeah. So what the developer has a responsibility to do is to demonstrate that they will capture that increase in runoff and they will prevent it from getting to the watercourse any quicker than it would have done if it was a green field. And there's industry standard techniques that do that. But the key term to think about is balanced. So they balance the new runoff from that site to what it would have been when it was a green field. Sometimes they actually improve it, which is a really difficult concept for many communities because they don't believe they're doing it. But what they'll do is they'll hold back so much water, they'll actually release it at a rate that's slower than what would have gone down there through the greenfield. I'm afraid I don't have the details of what we've responded to on the application, if indeed we were consulted. And as part of the legislation, the authority that comments on discharge from a site is actually the lead local flood authority. So we won't be commenting on the discharge rates from it. We will comment if it's on the floodplain, if it could be at risk from flooding, or if the fact that it would prevent that floodplain from filling up because there's buildings there where there was once green fields. We'll comment on that aspect, but the lead local flood authorities comment on the discharge rate that's coming from the site. If it's on a floodplain, again, ideally, the planning framework suggests that, well, you should look for sites that aren't in the floodplain sequentially. But that's a difficult conundrum when, you know, there's a limited amount of land where you can deliver. Again, there are techniques to ensure that the buildings will be safe, so how high they're built, so watercourses won't flood them, but also that if they are taking up floodplain storage, in our terms, we will say if you're pinching floodplain storage, you must provide it somewhere else. And that's called compensation. And again, all the mechanisms are there in the planning process to ensure that that happens. Okay.
Thank you, David. Okay, 3 to go, starting with Graham. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair. So if I may, and you'll have to excuse me, I want to talk about discharges. There's been a lot about discharges over the last few years into rivers. Unfortunately, it's a bad way. I want to speak up on behalf of farmers, although I do drive by farms and do see them being sprayed and see them brown as carpets. And I know there's issues there, but it's not just the farmers. Having worked in a brewery for 28 years and being told, don't discharge spoilt beer or caustic or paracetic acid down the drains until Severn Trent have been in, have the 2 bottles that we take over to the gatehouse for 28 years. I don't think it just lies with farmers. Although I appreciate you doing great work there, all that work said and done, I have to say, we're in such a state because you started off with the rivers are all polluted or got chemicals in them. I'm really concerned about that. I also see here that in July 2026, Ofwat ruled that Severn Trent had failed its operations to maintain and upgrade its machinery. I'm not here to criticise, but I'm just observation on facts. So thank you for that.
So feedback, anybody want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, just to reassure you, we don't sit here thinking everything's perfect. And we are constantly, I mean, I would say at the forefront of people who really want to make things better. And whilst we've talked a lot about water companies and farmers, we also regulate industry and we permit industry, and we have national policies and DEFRA have policies, and so all of those things. So if you set up a brewery or something like that, you'll need to get a permit and your discharges will be permitted and worked out. So it's not just farmers, you're absolutely right. But farming and sewage treatment tend to be the 2 largest polluters of our current water system. There are industry is another big part. I think you had a slide that showed the different portions.
So just some supporting context on that. So I don't know if you've heard something called metaldehyde. So that was the blue slug pellets that were in existence sort of 10, 15 years ago. So within our drinking water, we had very low levels of metaldehyde, which is identified from basically use on agriculture. That product was banned. I think it's around 8, 10 years ago. And, you know, I'm just, I suppose, really sort of pleased to see the metaldehyde levels in raw water have now actually, you know, effectively disappeared. So I think it can demonstrate, if you can have the right legislative framework around banning some of these chemicals. PFAS is another example that you'll see quite a lot in the public press. We can, I suppose, face into some of these chronic water quality problems, but it just will take time, and it will take legislation to improve that. So I think we can achieve it, but again, it's a collective effort.
Thank you, chaps. Okay, Graham.
Can I just say as well, through complaints that I've had about all the issues we talked about, that it's mainly been that we seem to work as different parties, and it's fantastic that you're sitting here now, and actually it's very obvious that we're working together, and I think that's the way forward for everyone, in particular us. Thank you.
Yep, I'll second that. It's nice to see everybody working together. Penultimate question from Dr. North. Away you go, Dee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for the information that you've shared. All three presentations were really informative, and it was really interesting to hear about some of the successes and some of the areas that you're already aware of. So going back a little bit, and forgive me for this because I've tried to make notes as well going through it, but did you say there was going to be a 40% increase on flooding and then 60% of that from riverbeds?
The figures were correct. So it was 40% in intensity of rainfall and 60% in river flow.
Okay. And your strategy showed how you were going to better monitor water and take measurements. And then Jonathan also added in some other measures and improvements as well on the strategy. So it's really nice, but this is still not preventative measure is what I'm not really getting that feeling or hearing that. I don't see the unity. I totally take on board that you're saying that you have to work collaboratively, but that hasn't been shown here today. You've all independently spoke. I think it would have been nice if you came together with one report, addressed issues that we all face as councillors and councils. We've all got our areas, we've all got flooding issues. I represent Whetstone, you know, despite its name, it's flooded twice, and you know it was probably on the news. There's also Narborough and Littlethorpe, and they're both prone to floods as well. There's the Narborough train station right nearby. There's development plans that have been allowed, and people argue against that, saying the increase, you know, this will create flood risks as well. So I suppose, where's the prevention already? I'm not seeing any of that. I mean, there's separate things, the chemical question as well that my colleague pointed out. I think that's really important, because when you hear that there's an unsafe amount of chemicals in the water, you know, wow, is it safe to drink? Is going to be what my constituents ask me next. So I suppose I want some of those follow-up questions to that information that you gave, but really on the prevention side. And I totally appreciate, maybe if you've got your monitoring and Jonathan's got on what he's got and the river wardens are doing their bit, which looks fantastic, by the way. I did see there was only 2 people though for Coventry and Leicestershire as river warden. So you think, well, how much of an impact are they going to have on singular flooding areas, or when it all goes together? Has, you know, is there just some disconnect at the moment? Should you guys already be talking? Do we need DEFRA in the room, or, you know, what's the plan moving forwards? Because we need something already, I think, and it'd be nice to see you guys in a year just have one presentation. You all take your turns into, you know, how you're doing that and how you're joined up. But I'm not really seeing or feeling any of that, and I don't know what to go back and tell my constituents. Thank you.
Shall I start? I'm going to be honest. I think you hit on some really key points. It is difficult. We are a regulator. We set the policy, and through DEFRA sets the policy. We put in place the requirements on the water company. And so there is a natural tension, if you like, between us. We then monitor whether they're putting that in place. We regulate it, and they're penalised if they don't meet those standards. I think we, in our area, is predominantly Severn Trent that I work with. That relationship is pretty good, but it is separate. And there's a real concern, for example. So, and I'll share this. This next planning phase, which is significantly bigger than the previous one, will really stretch the EA's resources in terms of how do we monitor and check and service that to make sure it's happening. And there have been some proposals in terms of how they will fund some resource in the EA. And there's a real concern that the public will see us then being hand in glove and treating them too kindly, if you like, and not really being a regulator. So we are a regulator and we have to have some separation there. I think we work together pretty well. But I think fundamentally there is a challenge, and that's why the Cunliffe Review came about, because people realise that there are some flaws in the current system. Although it is, and it has had some improvement, it's not been to the satisfaction, if you like, of the wider population and indeed ourselves. And so what can be done? And the Cunliffe Review was very much about how do we address that? How do we get a better system? And there's an internal review at the moment in the EA looking at so Dave, and he's not, thankfully, we came here on water quality heading and it's been flooding. Thanks, Dave. We work closely together. We're part of the same team, but ultimately our teams are separate and they're dealing with their very focused areas. And there's a constant challenge on how we could do that better. And there is a review as we speak in the EA about actually should we recut this completely and join ourselves up together and have one group of people dealing completely with the water. So I suppose what you've picked up on, I have to accept, is not perfect. We are doing, I think, a pretty good job, but can it be done better? It's definitely being looked at. Cunliffe Review and indeed in the internal to the EA, should we actually reconfigure ourselves to look at water management? It's called the Water Management Review, because you're dealing with flood risk and chucking water out into the sea as fast as you possibly can. I'm dealing with water resource. How do we constrain that, look after water and conserve it? And if you're in different teams, sometimes you miss opportunities. So I think, yeah, there's room for improvement there.
So just to follow up, if I may, Chair.
Yep, sure, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that honest answer. I really respect that you've been really honest today. I think what I'd like to take away from here is something that I could also give my residents as assurance and saying, look, we haven't got all the answers yet, but what the first key thing is really is that we're aware of what we need to fix. I think that's really important. So while you've been speaking, I've been checking out some of your initiatives online, and it was great because I could go to this page and report an environmental problem. So if I've got a flood, I've got somewhere to go. The one thing that I found interesting is there was a website with a link. I think it was off the River Warden ones when I was looking, and it was a flood alert. So I put in Narborough, and it says, yeah, you don't have any floods at the minute. And I thought, well, that's great. But could there be some sort of system where I could actually understand how prone that area could be to flooding, what sorts of things I could be vigilant about, look out for? What could I communicate as a councillor to my local areas and say, look, because we've got 2 voluntary flood wardens, I believe Leicester County Council have also appointed flood wardens now as well as precautions, but it's not enough. People aren't aware enough. We still don't know who to even call or where that person goes. And like other councillors have mentioned today, everyone feels a little bit passed around or fobbed off. So could there be some really good information I could take back from this meeting, say, look, this is what we do, this is who we call, and these are things that we know are being worked upon. Thank you.
Is that anything that was left out of the replies, or is there more to add?
Yeah, I can address some specific points. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. North, because what the questions you've asked there really reinforce a message that I was attempting to give in the presentation, which is the first step to being resilient to flood risk is to understand what that risk is. And all the data and all the information is there for your constituents or your community, to access that data. So you can see online a map which shows all areas which are at risk of flooding. You can put in your specific address and it will describe what the risk is from water courses and from surface water risk. And then you can zone in on a map and you can see what exactly that risk is. One of the slides in my presentation said that despite all of that information being there, there's still work to do to get communities to know that, to use it and to appreciate it. So I would love, you know, all councillors to be giving that message to their communities. Look, check online and understand your flood risk, because that's your first step to being able to be doing something about it, as well as the authorities. In terms of warnings and alerts, so if you are in a flood risk area, you can sign up for our flood warning service. It's free, and that alert or warning can arrive via text, email, or all the clever social media things that younger people and I are into, and you will get that alert and that warning, and they will be triggered by the relevant watercourse levels and gauges. So yes, by all means, please do give that message. Encourage your communities to understand their risk. In terms of being fobbed off, it's something which we struggle with, because as the authorities, we are responsible for different things. I mean, if you think of a house builder, yes, we're all building the same house, but your plumber doesn't put your windows in. And, you know, a fireman won't have the same responsibilities as a policeman, despite them both being a blue light service. It's the same in the water industry. We don't have the same responsibilities or authorities that the water companies do, and vice versa. So there will inevitably be always be a case of the issue that you're describing there. Really, we haven't got the authority to deal with that. It's going to be the water company. And I'm afraid that you know, we'll never get around that. There will always be a bit of that. But what I can assure you is that in my experience, hopefully, and if it's not the case, we'll be disappointed, that each of the authorities will listen with empathy and will try and help as the best they can and direct you to the right place where you can get the help that you need.
Can I also just say it is a challenge in terms of who's responsible for what. And the other thing is, when people are at risk of flooding and the alerts have gone off and the warning comes in, I think often they probably don't really think it through. They think the EA is going to stop the flood. We can't stop the flood. We have assets. We have all sorts of flood defences. If they get breached, which is what the alerts are for, there isn't, you know, we can't send a person out who's going to put the thumb in the dike, sadly. And sometimes, you know, if it's surface water flooding, I can understand somebody, you know, they don't really care who's responsible for it. But again, it's not our people. What we will do, however, is in all circumstances, we'll work very closely with the local flood risk authority. We do get people out. We work with the fire brigade, we work with the police, and we will always have somebody in the incident control centre when floods are going on to advise and guide and give EAs information to try and assist. But I do appreciate, I mean, it can be really frustrating for those people, particularly under those circumstances. So I think we'll take it away. I mean, we constantly put these messages up and see if we can do anything better as an organisation. But it's a bit of a consistent theme, isn't it? So we'll see what we can do.
Sorry, and just one quick plea from me really is if you identify any pollutions or external sort of flooding from a network, can you please report that directly into Severn Trent? I think that's several benefits there, but one is predominantly speed, because ultimately that ends up from the Environment Agency into Severn Trent, and we respond to it, and that allows us to do a faster response to any environmental issues that we're causing. And just another sort of key point from us as well, so for every sort of 3 pollutions that we respond to, only 1 is related to our network or our assets. So again, hopefully it demonstrates that we are, you know, going above and beyond, and blue dye and portaloos and paint in the network. You know, we do respond and clean that up. But yeah, plea for me, if you can ask your members just to report Severn Trent directly.
Thank you. Mr. Tilbury has a comment to add.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor North. That was very impressive question. I think I'll just wrap it up now, Chair. Myself and Dave were on Radio Leicester in the winter, and I think people's frustrations were they don't know who looked after what, and they said, why isn't it under one-stop shop. It's flooding, and it was hard to actually like explain to them what we actually look after, but it is all available on the website, who looks after what. I know it's really complicated. In an ideal world, we'd want one person to look after it, but we are where we are. This is the situation we're in. So, I mean, we're working as closely with the Environment Agency, I think, than we have ever done. Dave came last week to meet myself and the leader. He's in regular communication and the EA with officers, and the same with Severn Trent. So we are getting better, and we've just got to work together to make this like the best for Leicestershire and countrywide. And what we'll do is we'll get officers to write up a full report of your Area D of what we're doing, what's been done, and also the neighbouring areas as well, because they all link in. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for. Oh, and
Thank you, Adam. We have one final question from Nick. Oh, sorry. Oh, Anne. Yeah.
I promise it'll be 30 seconds. And just to add on to what lead members said there, just, you know, in terms of an immediate thing for your residents, we've got loads of information on our website as Lead Local Flood Authority. It's all about be flood ready. You know, it's so difficult to get the message over because you hit the nail on the head. It's a very disparate sector, you know, but there's some clear messages and clear things people can do to be ready and help prevent the worst of the impacts of flooding. So please, you know, that's one thing to say to your residents in the short term, but, you know, absolutely, you know, we'll take the actions that Adam's committed to as well.
And Jana has a comment.
Sorry, Chair. It was just to say one of the things that has been particularly useful to previous versions of this committee is that we do have a kind of diagram format of those responsibilities. I think, Adam, when you first came in, so it's kind of landscape picture of different assets and who's responsible for them. So happy to sort of circulate that to members of this committee again, just as an updated version. My colleague Joe, we have provided copies as well if there are particular meetings that would be useful. We prefer to keep it online, as you know, for cost purposes. But if you are attending something like that and you think it would be useful, we have done that in the past as well, because I think it is at least one single reference point of those that you can then launch off from. So happy to share that as well, Chair.
Thanks, Jana. Yeah, that sounds very useful. We can use that direct to our constituents. So, yeah, great. Have I missed anybody else? Anybody else got any other comments on that one? Right, Nick. Final question to Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Now back to that awkward question now. Told you there's one coming. This has actually got to do with water quality. The fact is, when we do have flooding, quite often there's foul drains are, yeah, squinting already, are flooded in that process and everything else. That foul water is going in with that nice, clean river water and rainwater. How big effect does that have on our water quality in our rivers and the land, what's left behind when that soaks away and all that's left behind? Who looks after and checks what's left behind at any time? Is that done by anybody? Does anyone do that? Because all these fields, what have been covered in all kinds of things, who looks after all that side of it? Because that directly affects the water quality. So there is a water quality one. And once again, thanks very much for coming.
You sure you don't want to answer that one?
Final comment on that one?
So first of all, there's no clean answer to that straight away, pardon the pun, because when you have these massive deluges, they're not uniform in any way. In general, the water is pretty well diluted, as in the sewage that goes into that process, but it's not perfect. And there will be places where it gets trapped and it creates, if you like, a concentration. We don't have a monitoring role of going out and checking where this has happened. We do if there's been an incident, for example, if there's a waste fire and the fire brigade are putting lots of water onto it and the runoff, we'll check that we'll try and bund it, we'll try and prevent it getting into the water streams. And if it does get into the water streams, we'll monitor that going on in terms of what impact it's having, etc. But after a storm event, no, our concentration tends to be on the recovery and getting our assets back and sorting those things out. Maybe that's something we should be looking at. If we get a report of serious pollution in some area, then we will go and investigate and we will look at what can happen to rectify it. But we don't have a monitoring process in there. And it's generally accepted that where there's flooding, it has diluted it and it washes it through pretty quickly.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, I've covered everybody. There's no questions remaining. Okay. Well, thank you for that. It was a very interesting, very fulsome answers. Sorry we've run a little bit over time, 15 minutes. We come to point 9 on the agenda, which is the Environment, Flooding, Climate Change and Waste Performance Report to June 2026. Anne Crothers, our Director of Growth, Environment and Transport, will present the report. And we also have Nicola Truslove in attendance from the Corporate Resources Department.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be swift because you've had a very long and interesting meeting, so I shall be swift. This is the performance report, so you're used to seeing this before. It's slightly different than previous reports, similar reports, because we now include the government's new local outcome framework indicators that are relevant to this portfolio. So that's national indicators that all authorities are required to report on, and we've now included those ones for this portfolio. And you will see them by in Appendix B. Those new ones have got an asterisk against them, and there is a description of them in Appendix C if you want to know a wee bit more about each of those. The report is to Q1 of this financial year, so that's to June this year, and updates, and I'll just run through those updates that have changed since last time for you swiftly. So I point you to Appendix B. That tends to be the easiest one to have a look at there. The first new performance indicator under those local outcome framework indicators is the number of publicly available EV charging devices per 100,000 of population, and that's just under that comes in for us at 80 per 100,000 population. And that, when we look at the historic data that's been pulled out, it shows a 16% increase in the last 12 months, so that's growing, and it's likely to be further supported by, you'll be aware that we have something called the Levi grant, which is from government to install EV charging infrastructure. So no doubt in future that will continue to boost that indicator. It's a similar picture with EV ownership per 10,000 population, and that's seeing a 6% increase between Q2 and 3 of the financial year, and that moves up to 370 per 10,000 population, and that sits in the second quartile when we compare it against comparable local authorities. There's been no real change in energy ratings for new and existing homes, and they both sit in the third quartile, and we have reported on those previously. No change on renewable energy generated or percentage of consumption, and our property team are currently looking at the target. They're reviewing the target for that one, so that one you may see changes in that one in the future. The estimated fraction of mortality attributable to particulate air pollution, and this is a new indicator that's come in, is in it's the second of the new indicators. The details of this indicator, if you want it, because it's not you'll understand coming from highways, transport, environment, waste, growth background, that health and pollution is probably not our specialist area. If you want a wee bit more detail on that, there is that in Appendix C. And in paragraph 21 of the report as well, there's a bit more of an explanation there. But it does show for us for 2024 that 5.3% is the estimated fraction of mortality attributable to that particular air pollution, which is a difficult one to say in a hurry. And we are in the fourth quartile of that. So we'll need to see how that goes over time as well. As I say, new one in there. Greenhouse gas emissions for all sources in Leicestershire have seen little change between the 2023 and 24 figures. But we have seen a slight improvement in the figure per capita, and that's gone from 6 to 5.8 tonnes. So reduction is an improvement because that's less emissions there. So good to see that. Total business mileage has remained similar to the previous quarter, and with the tree planting indicator, as we've seen each time, that has increased, and we're now at 538,000, so well over halfway, so really good progress there. The target is 1 million by 2032, as you may recall. If I look at the waste indicators, I'll just highlight some of the new indicators that have come in with that government set. Firstly, the residual household waste per household. So that's your black bag waste, that's residual, not your recyclates or anything else, your food waste, it's your black bag waste. For Leicestershire, that figure is 550 kilograms, and that puts us in the third quartile. The second new one is a percentage household waste collected separately as food waste. So I'm sure you're all aware there's new requirements that all collection authorities, the districts, have to collect food waste. So this is now monitoring that. But you'll see there the data shows that we're at 0.07%, so it's really small. But what I would say, it doesn't reflect the current financial year. So from when the legislation came in, which was April, it's pre that, and Northwest Leicestershire had a trial, so it's reflecting that as opposed to where we are now. But I will just caveat that only some of the waste collection authorities have yet brought in food waste. The others are still on a trajectory to get there. However, the figures will go up over time. I'm pretty sure we'll see that, which will be positive in that indicator. The other ones, actually, there aren't any major changes on, so I'll just stop there because we have had quite a lengthy meeting, Chair. Thank you, but happy to take any questions, as will Nicola.
Thank you, Anne. Anything to add from Nicola?
No, it's just familiarising ourselves with the new LOF outcomes, which really are to dovetail between government and local government, so that we're all on the same sort of outcomes. So that was just the major changes Anne said, really.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Tilbury, anything to add?
No, thanks, Chair. It's all been covered. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll open it up again for questions from members. If anybody has any questions. Okay, it looks like we're all happy then. The report is a 6 monthly update for us to note. The committee's comments will be recorded in the minutes, and that's my recommendation. Brings us to item 10. Excuse me. Committee members are asked to note the dates of future meetings for 2027. Akil will send diary invites following the meeting. So there's a list of those. Bringing us to item 11. If there are no other urgent items, I therefore declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a pleasant evening.